Welcome to the Good for America podcast. I'm your host, former Congressman Bob Good, former chairman of the House Freedom Caucus. I want to remind you to subscribe to the podcast, rate the show, refer it to your friends, and follow me on social media. So I want to start today with a brief discussion on the fight between President Trump and Marjorie Taylor Greene, the recent vote in Congress on the full release of the Epstein files, and the Supreme Court decision that's pending on President Trump's tariffs. After that, I want to move into the larger conversation about my visit to a high school in my former congressional district and my remarks to some high school students there today. So with respect to the so-called MAGA fight between President Trump and Marjorie Taylor Greene, I've had some firsthand experience with both these individuals, so I didn't want to fail to address this fight that's getting so much attention. Again, I've had some firsthand experience with both of them, particularly last year when I was in the middle of a primary battle fighting for re-election, and I had a primary opponent that was ultimately endorsed by President Trump and Marjorie Taylor Greene. And I will say that the two of them kind of deserve each other politically. They both are narcissist, self-centered individuals who tend to use others for their own political purposes, their own political gain. They joined forces last year to lie about me, to smear me, to try to destroy me politically, and support my primary opponent, the current member of Congress from Virginia's 5th District. Marjorie Taylor Greene had a personal vendetta against me because I was among those who kicked her out of the House Freedom Caucus a couple of years ago, and President Trump, of course, because I endorsed Governor Ron DeSantis in the primary back in 2023. But I think the reason why you're seeing this fight between them is that at some point narcissists have trouble coexisting. Both of them, again, have demonstrated they're willing to lie about people, to smear people, to destroy anyone who crosses them or doesn't support them 100%. She's apparently angry because he wouldn't support her desire to run statewide for senator or governor. And he's angry at her over her support for the full release of the Epstein files, her criticism of his tariffs and some of his other policy decisions. And so you've had this falling out that's played out on social media and in the media across the country. It's harmful to the party, it's harmful to the Republican agenda, and it's unfortunate to see. But with respect to some of the policy differences that have caused this fight between President Trump and Marjorie Taylor Greene, with respect to the Epstein files, I have maintained that all Republicans should have been yes from the beginning on the full release of the Epstein files. All Republicans should have been in favor of truth, transparency, accountability. All Republicans should support blind justice and equal treatment under the law, irrespective of who's implicated, and especially for the powerful, the wealthy, and the well-connected. Unfortunately, President Trump and his team have created, to some degree, the appearance of wrongdoing with the way they've handled this over the last, or mishandled it over the last few months. There's been self-inflicted wounds by him and his Department of Justice and his FBI. Democrats haven't wanted full release of the Epstein files for years either, of course, and that's been pointed to many times, because their side is implicated. Powerful, influential Democrats and Democrat donors and are implicated in these files, I'm sure. And while I highly doubt that there's any criminality by President Trump or he's going to be in any kind of legal jeopardy as this information is fully released and comes out, perhaps there's more embarrassing information, or maybe perhaps there's friends, powerful, influential, wealthy friends and donors of his that'll be implicated. It certainly will be interesting to see as this information continues to come out. With respect to President Trump's tariffs, I haven't really spoken about this on the podcast. I've tried to give President Trump the benefit of the doubt on tariffs. I agree with his intentions, the reasons why he has implemented tariffs and utilized those in terms of what he's trying to accomplish. He wants to level the playing field and to have America stop being taken advantage of by our foreign allies and adversaries alike. He wants to bring jobs and manufacturing back home to the United States. He wants to open U.S. markets or open other foreign markets to U.S. goods to increase our exports. Obviously, places like Japan that have closed us off historically to selling vehicles there while they sell vehicles here. He's wanted to use tariffs to leverage and negotiate for America's foreign policy objectives or his foreign policy objectives. However, we have to acknowledge that tariffs are ultimately a tax on Americans. When you place tariffs on foreign goods that are imported in the United States and sold in the United States, those tariffs are ultimately passed on to the consumers in higher prices. And under the Constitution, only Congress has the power to tax and to levy tariffs. That's clear in the Constitution. Article 1, Section 8 says, and I quote, "The Congress shall have power to lay and collect taxes, duties, imposts, and excises," those are tariffs, "to pay the debts and provide for the common defense and general welfare of the United States." So again, Article 1, Section 8 says, "The Congress shall have the power to lay and collect taxes, duties, imposts, and excises, to pay the debts and provide for the common defense and general welfare of the United States." So the founders intended that only Congress would have the ability to tax us, which includes tariffs, because they wanted, again, the legislative body, particularly the House of Representatives, that portion of the federal government that was most responsive to the American people, that had to answer to the American people every 2 years, standing for re-election, to be the ones that had those very important powers, such as taxing us, and for that matter, declaring war and sending our troops into battle. So with respect to President Trump's tariffs, even though it is increasing some revenue, it's estimated maybe it might be as much as a couple $100 billion of revenue on an annual basis. That revenue, time will tell, but may be offset by lower GDP or gross domestic product here as other countries respond and we have lower exports. It may result in reduced manufacturing here if we're not able to export as much because other countries respond with reciprocal tariffs. Also, President Trump's $2,000 stimulus checks that he's proposing to take some of the tariff money and send it back to the American people with $2,000 stimulus checks. That would absorb most, if not all, the revenue that's coming in from the tariffs and would undermine the purpose. The president has said, hey, I want to use the tariffs to pay down the debt, to reduce the deficit. Well, if you're going to send out checks as a result of the tariffs, then you're going to undermine that supposed purpose. And the other thing is we just can't keep governing by emergency. President Trump declares emergencies to justify what he wants to do. That's precedent setting. That's affirming Democrats doing the same. Someday there will be another Democrat president, and the next Democrat president can declare a climate emergency and put a tariff on autos, gas-powered autos that come into the country, or auto parts. Future Democrat president can declare a gun violence emergency and put a tariff on guns or parts that are used to manufacture guns coming in the country as well. So I think ultimately the Supreme Court is going to rule against the tariffs. I think they're going to rule the president doesn't have the constitutional authority to assess tariffs on his own. I think perhaps they'll allow some exceptions or some limited time frames, and I don't think they're going to require the money to be paid back. That's been talked about, that the harm that would come if the president or the executive branch had to pay back all the money that's been collected from those tariffs. I think that's impractical. How would you pay it back? To who would you pay it back? So all that said, the way to deal with the deficit and the debt is to cut the spending. And I would also encourage the president to go bold and to go big. Let's fight to abolish the IRS and to eliminate income taxes. Replace it with a national sales tax. If you want to go big and bold in terms of revenue, let's abolish the IRS, eliminate the income tax, and replace it with a national sales tax. More on that in a future episode, but I just wanted to speak with respect to President Trump's tariffs for the first time. So as I mentioned, I had the privilege today of speaking to a group of high school students in Albemarle High School. They have a Turning Point USA chapter there. It's a new chapter. Albemarle County, where Albemarle High School is located, is in the Central Virginia area in the middle of the 5th District, or the northwest corner of the 5th District that I used to represent. But it's in the Charlottesville area. Albemarle County is the county that surrounds the city of Charlottesville. So Charlottesville is the most liberal part of Virginia. That's the home of the University of Virginia, Mr. Jefferson's University. But the surrounding county of Charlottesville is Albemarle County. The city of Charlottesville itself, I got 13% of the vote both times that I ran for Congress in 2020 and 2022. In the general election, got 13% of the vote in Charlottesville. So 87% voted against me. But I got about 35% in Albemarle County, the county that surrounds the city of Charlottesville, where the high school is that I spoke at today, Albemarle High School. I've spoken 4 or 5 times across town to the Western Albemarle High School chapter over the past year. They started a chapter about a year ago, and they have one of the largest chapters in the country with well over 100 students in their Turning Point USA chapter. But there's a new chapter in Albemarle High School, across town from Western Albemarle High School, and that's where I was today. We had about 50 kids in the auditorium at the lunchtime event that I was speaking at. Some of them were there in what I would say was respectful opposition. They were there to ask some challenging questions, but we were glad to have them there. They were respectful and certainly allowed me to speak without any interruption or any obstacles to doing that. So I'm really grateful, though, for these students in Western Albemarle High School and Albemarle High School who are taking a stand, starting these Turning Point USA chapters, particularly them doing it, again, in an area where it truly costs them something. It's a little harder to take a stand for the right things when it costs you something. And there are places around the country, around the Commonwealth of Virginia, certainly around the 5th District that I represented for 4 years, where it costs you a little more, and that's in the Charlottesville-Albemarle area. And we tend to value things by how much they cost us, and taking a stand for the right things costs you a little more in the Charlottesville-Albemarle area. So I'm thankful to these students, their parents who've obviously raised them right, the sponsor, the teacher sponsor for this Turning Point USA chapter at Albemarle High School. And I'm also thankful for any other school personnel, administration, teachers who are supporting this chapter, or at least the students' ability to have this chapter. Our side wins when there's freedom of speech, freedom of expression, freedom of assembly like we had today at Albemarle High School. We win when there's the free exchange of ideas and healthy debate. And that's because truth, facts, and right are on our side. Lies, falsehoods, and wrong are on the other side. That's why we don't try to censor the other side, cancel them, shout them down, or shut them down. It's the other side that tries to censor conservative voices, cancel us, shut us down, shout us down. And it's really important to that effect, by the way, that our elected officials shouldn't threaten censorship of the left. That's particularly concerning with when President Trump and his FCC have done that. His FCC director, Carr, it just happened again where President Trump, speaking to a ABC reporter, said that ABC ought to lose their license because their coverage of him was too negative. That is a dangerous precedent-setting thing. It is, or it affirms it when the left censors, cancels conservative voices. And frankly, it's unconstitutional. It is unconstitutional. We talked today during my time with these students at Albemarle High School about the First Amendment. And of course, I asked them what was the first right protected in the First Amendment, and they said speech, and I had to correct them and tell them that it's religion, but speech is part of the First Amendment protected rights that we have. So in speaking to the students from Albemarle High School today, I talked primarily about the Constitution and about the fiscal situation in the country, and I told these students that their elected officials in Washington are literally stealing from them. They're continuing to borrow and spend and leave these young people, these students, with the debt, leave them paying the debt and holding the bag for the reckless, wasteful, harmful spending that's going on by our elected officials in Washington. Whether it's through continued high inflation, less purchasing power. I explained to them how the dollar is worth about 70 cents versus what it was worth just 4 or 5 years ago. So whether it's through higher inflation, lower purchasing power, higher taxes, higher interest rates, or simply the huge IOU that eventually has to be paid and continues to massively grow, our elected officials, Republicans and Democrats, are stealing from the younger generation or stealing from our young people with their wasteful, reckless, massive spending. And they're going to keep doing it as long as we keep electing and reelecting them. But also complicit by either direct or indirect beneficial association is our generation that's not paying off the debt and continues again to elect and reelect these same members of Congress, these people who run for the White House. And if we continue to vote for or at least accept these government benefits that are bankrupting the country, these government benefits that are unconstitutional, that are not an appropriate use of the federal role for the federal government, are not an appropriate confiscation of our tax dollars, and again, that are bankrupting the country, we just don't have the money. We as a people are complicit for voting for and electing those officials who continue to perpetrate this and perpetuate this and to accept and benefit from this federal spending. I shared with these students at Albemarle High School that the national debt reached $2 trillion 40 years ago, just around the time that I was in high school. So about 40 years ago, when I was about their age, the national debt was about $2 trillion. And by the way, I never had a visit from a congressman when I was in high school. Probably most of you didn't either. But I will tell you, during my time in Washington, I did try to speak in every senior government class in my district every year. So I tried to speak in as many senior government classes around my district as I could. Got to about a third or a half of them every year. Didn't get to all of them, but certainly tried to do so. Because if we can talk to young people when they're in high school about the Constitution, about the truth about America, about the truth about our federal government, then I think that would go a long way to raising good citizens who will help us keep the republic. But I was talking to these students about how the national debt was about $2 trillion when I was in high school, and how has it expanded 19-fold since that time to the 38 trillion it is today. So over the last 40 years, the debt has gone from 2 trillion to 38 trillion, or expanded 19-fold. I told them just wait a few minutes, it'll be 39 trillion, but currently it's at 38 trillion. And if this kind of multiplying exponential growth continues, and it's actually accelerating and getting worse with the snowball effect of record borrowing and record compounded interest, it's moving, that snowball is rolling downhill faster and faster. But if nothing changes before a fiscal, economic, financial collapse, and it continues to explode and grow at the pace it has over the last 40 years, in 40 years, that $38 trillion debt that we have today will, with a 19-fold increase, will be $722 trillion, or 0.7 of a quadrillion by 2065. So again, 40 years from now, if the debt continues to grow at the pace it has over the last 40 years and increases by 19-fold, going from 2 trillion to 38 trillion. If that happens again over the next 40 years, the debt will be over $700 trillion, or nearly a quadrillion dollars. A quadrillion. We don't use the number quadrillion. I mean, we're talking about numbers at this point that we just can't even conceive of, quadrillion. So nearly 1,000 trillion is what the debt would be if it grows at the same rate over the next 40 years that it has over the last 40 years. This should be especially terrifying to you because the debt has risen faster than projected for years. So in other words, if you look backwards and all the projections on how fast the debt would grow, it's gotten faster and faster. So it'll likely be worse, not better, unless something intervenes, something catastrophic happens to change the trajectory. And I don't think it will happen in terms of, I don't think the debt's going to reach 700 trillion 40 years from now, because I think the intervening consequences are going to be too great. I don't think we can last 40 years at this pace. The debt has essentially doubled just since 2015 over the last 10 years, meaning the debt was less than 20 trillion before Trump was elected the first time. The debt essentially grew by 8 trillion during Trump's first term, by 8 trillion during Biden's term. So it basically doubled in the last 10 years. So if it doubles to 76 trillion in the next 10 years, goes from the 38 trillion now to 76 trillion in 10 years, I think the consequences of just that will be unbearable and unsustainable. that will have massive record inflation, crushing taxes and crushing interest rates, and possible default, where the government just can't pay the debt anymore, can't pay the interest on the debt anymore, can't borrow anymore, can't sell our debt anymore. I think that would cause a housing crisis, a banking crisis, crisis in our equity markets, our stock markets, and so forth, crashes and collapses. And that's the path that we're on without our elected officials, our Congress, addressing the reckless, wasteful, harmful deficit borrowing and spending that's going on. But instead, what do we have? Coming out of the Schumer shutdown, we've got so-called conservatives in Congress continue to vote for the status quo. Biden's budget in a CR, something that conservatives wouldn't have voted for in recent years, but they're voting routinely for continuing resolutions that continue the Biden COVID level spending. And you've got so-called conservatives proclaiming victory because they got a CR that, hey, we had a government shutdown and we didn't add a lot of spending to it. We just did another CR. And they're patting themselves on the back and celebrating the shutdown deal. And what they did was they actually raised spending on the 3 appropriation bills that had been passed by the House and the Senate, Milcon VA, agriculture, and the ledge branch. They've raised spending by 4% on these 3 bills that were passed for a year through September 30 of next year. How in the world can we raise spending at all instead of cutting it? But they raised spending by 4% on those 3 bills. And then they did a short-term CR or continuing resolution to keep the Biden budget in place until the end of January on the other 9 appropriations bills. They seem to want to make a deal on the Obamacare subsidies rather than letting them expire at the end of the year as they're scheduled to do. And you're going to have another shutdown fight at the end of January when this current CR expires. Meanwhile, you have the vilification or the villainizing of those who are speaking the truth and demonstrating courage from a fiscal standpoint, particularly those 2 guys from Kentucky, Thomas Massie in the House and Rand Paul in the Senate. Look what happened to Rand Paul when a couple of weeks ago he talked about how we've got to raise the Social Security retirement age. They've got to raise it to age 70. That's a no-brainer in my view. The fact is Social Security is broken. It's unsustainable. It's going bankrupt. And if Congress doesn't act, it's going to face a mandatory benefit cut of more than 20% for today's seniors. But again, our elected officials apparently don't care about any of this. And apparently neither do the American people, who keep electing and reelecting these same members of Congress and people to the White House who are letting us down when it comes to the fiscal issues. I guess next year's 2026 Republican campaign slogan is, hey, we kept the $2 trillion annual deficits, but at least we took the debt over $40 trillion. I think that's the Republican campaign slogan for next year. We kept the $2 trillion annual deficits and we took the debt over $40 trillion. That's not much of a campaign slogan to win. But how long will Americans continue to accept this as they suffer from the current affordability crisis? There is an affordability crisis going on in this country, and it's directly related to the government spending and the government debt and the actions by our elected officials in Washington. And Trump and other Republicans have to stop denying that it's a problem. Stop claiming or pretending the economy is great and that inflation is fixed. The economy is improving and inflation has slowed down, but it's not fixed. And we can't declare victory. We can't pretend that we have a great economy and that inflation is totally under control. I believe President Trump's policies will work like they worked during his first term in terms of growing the economy and increasing revenue. But we can't be proposing dumb, harmful things like 50-year mortgages that would only make it worse. We want to deal with the affordability crisis by cutting spending. We don't want to make things worse by telling people that we'll give them a federal subsidized 50-year mortgage. The goal of homeownership is equity, ownership of the home, not creating lifelong renters who would be more subject to default or foreclosure because they have no skin in the game. If you got a 50-year mortgage, it'll take you forever to get any ownership in your property. So we need to stop thinking and talking about Also, inflationary deficit busting $2,000 stimulus checks. That's not going to help the affordability crisis. If we turn around and do what Biden did during COVID and start sending out checks to people, this is also wealth redistribution of the tariff money. So the justification for the tariff money, again, is that we're going to use it to pay down the debt and decrease the deficit. But if you turn around and you send out $2,000 stimulus checks with the money, that is taking money from those who are paying for the tariffs and distributing to those who you're choosing to give the money to. Again, that's what happened during COVID. The answer is to pay down the debt. Pay down the debt, cut spending, and pay down the debt. The good news is that attacking the current affordability crisis and our future fiscal crisis require the same strategies. Attacking the current affordability crisis and the future fiscal crisis require the same strategies. Focus on the basics. It's not easy, but it's not complicated. Let's get the blocking and the tackling right. Cut the spending. Don't increase spending by 4% over Biden's COVID levels like Republicans just did with these 3 spending bills that are funded for another year. Again, the Agriculture Department, the legislative branch, and the military construction and VA, those spending was increased by 4%. That's inexcusable. That's indefensible. We've got to reform the entitlements, food stamps or SNAP, housing assistance, cash welfare, Medicaid, Social Security, Medicare. We've got to reject the notion as the government as the nanny, government as the provider. Republicans cannot accept that notion as government as Santa Claus. We've got to reject and combat cultural dependency and generational poverty. This is philosophical. We've got to align the interests of the individual taxpayers and the beneficiaries of government welfare and government entitlement programs and the states and the federal government to move people off of the government roles. Almost all welfare and government assistance should be, other than Social Security, Medicare, but I'm talking about Medicaid and housing assistance and cash welfare and food stamps. All this should be temporary, except for those who are truly disabled and unable to take care of themselves, where we've got compassionate decreases in the amount of support, diminishing dollars over time as we reduce those payouts. And we've got to implement work requirements for those who are able-bodied working age individuals. We've got to get more people working, participating, helping the economy. And states and the federal government, along with the taxpayers and the beneficiaries of these welfare programs, have to have a stake in successful outcomes, which is getting people off government dependency, ending generational poverty and the culture of dependency. We've got to reform healthcare, embrace the MAHA movement, make America healthy again, incentivize health through the right kind of diet, exercise, preventing health problems, not just treating them with more drugs. We want to promote market-driven, patient-centric, transparent, competitive, open healthcare reforms and health insurance reforms. Keep fighting to keep taxes low, to cut regulations, to remove barriers to growth, success, investment, expansion of businesses, and taking risks. Those are Trump policies from the first term. We've got to continue to work to produce massive amounts of reliable, affordable energy, fossil fuels, which is oil, natural gas, coal, along with nuclear. We've got to combat and reject climate policies. President Trump is doing a good job on this. Combat or reject wind and solar. It's unreliable, it's unaffordable, it'll never be the answer. And instead support the lowest cost, most efficient, most reliable energy. That is critical for our economy. Stop allowing utility providers to pass on the higher costs of wind and solar to consumers. In other words, if utility companies want to invest in wind and solar, they shouldn't be able to pass on those costs to consumers for the least efficient, least affordable energy sources. We should, for that matter, end all subsidies of energy, all farm subsidies, all corporate welfare subsidies, and end foreign aid. These are just some of the things that we need to do to address the current affordability crisis and the future fiscal crisis. But the biggest thing is to cut federal spending. If we don't win on this, if we don't win on the current affordability crisis and the future fiscal crisis that's being caused by the massive government spending, then Americans will increasingly turn to socialist communists like they recently did in New York City with the election of Mamdani. Out of desperation, they will choose full immersion into socialism, communism, which will only hasten the demise. Why should voters settle for Democrat-light Republicans who refuse to cut spending and shrink government? If Republicans don't do what they say they will do, if Republicans don't choose to be bold and to show the courage to do the right thing, then voters might as well choose the real thing with Democrats. Someday, if we continue on this track, we're going to have the Argentina situation where the people finally turn to a true, courageous, fiscal conservative. This Javier Milei, who's the current president of Argentina. Argentina was so much trouble, they finally decided, you know what, let's trust a conservative. Let's try conservatism because socialism is not working. The alternative to choosing true, courageous fiscal conservatives is a communist state. That's the track that we're on if we continue down this road. So I talked with the kids at Albemarle High School about the Constitution, about our constitutional republic, about the constitutional limit to the federal government. I talked about the 9th and the 10th Amendments that say, hey, we retain all the rights not prohibited to us in the Constitution. We retain all those rights, and how that all the powers not given the federal government in the Constitution are left to the people in the states, and how far away from that we are as a country. So it's incumbent upon us. Let's keep the republic for those students that I talked to today at Albemarle High School outside Charlottesville. Let's keep the republic for them and those who are coming behind us. So thanks for joining me on this episode of the Good for America podcast. Please remember to subscribe to the show, subscribe to the podcast, rate the show, refer it to your friends, follow me on social media at Rep Bob Good. Let's keep the republic.